My parents built me to restore my brother's legacy after his accident, made me design machines in secret and let him take the credit. When I asked to present my own work, they said, "You exist to keep his genius alive." He called me his living toolkit. I said nothing. Years later, he's broken and I have my name back. They say genius runs in the blood. In my family, it was practically law. My name is Kara. I'm 17 and I grew up on Caldron, a wind-blasted island known more for its gears and brasswork than its beaches. My family, the Vins, had been the island's master craftsmen for generations. Our inventions powered the water lines, spun the mills, even rang the church bells at noon. Everyone knew the Vin name. Everyone knew Dorian Vin, my older brother. No one knew me. Dorian was supposed to be the next great Vin, the boy with fingers blessed by the old mechanics, a child prodigy before he could walk straight. But when he was 5, there was a fire in the workshop. A steam valve blew while he was checking a pressure gauge. His hands were caught in the blast, crushed, burned, ruined. That was the end of Dorian's career before it had even begun. And the start of mine. I wasn't born yet when the accident happened. When I came along a few years later, I was supposed to be a second chance. But not in the normal, hopeful way. My parents, cold, brilliant people, engineered me. Literally. They used blacklisted techniques, unregulated gene weaving. Gave me what they called mirror cognition. It meant I would think just like Dorian would have. I was designed to finish what he started. From the outside, we were just a family grieving a lost dream. On the inside, we were an assembly line. I learned to read schematics before I could read storybooks. My hands were trained before I ever held a doll. Every lesson was private, locked behind soundproof doors, always under the cover of Dorian's recovering his motor skills. The town believed it. They still believed he was designing machines in solitude, speaking only through the work he submitted to the island council. But it wasn't him. It was me. When Dorian was 10 and I was 6, we presented our first invention, a compact desalination unit small enough to fit on a fishing skiff. It won first prize at the Caldron Youth Expo. Dorian stood for the picture. I hid in the ceiling crawlspace and watched them hand him the medal. He never looked up. This went on for years. I built, he posed. I solved, he explained. If a project had a flaw, I worked through the night to fix it before the next morning's inspection. When I fell asleep at my desk, my mother would wake me not with a blanket, but with a sharper pencil. They told me I was lucky. "You were made for this," my father would say, adjusting the loop over his eye as he checked my etchings. Not many children get such a clear purpose. I nodded. I always nodded. Because what else was I going to do? Say no? I didn't even have a name outside these walls. At the council, I was the assistant. At home, I was hands. My parents praised my precision, but only in private. In public, all the genius belonged to Dorian. The broken boy who became a legend because I stayed invisible. I wasn't a daughter. I was a legacy strategy. A replacement gear. And every time Dorian bowed to applause he hadn't earned, something inside me wound tighter. Ready to snap. I was 11 the first time I heard them talk about the exhibition. They didn't know I was awake. I had crept down the hallway barefoot, drawn by the sound of my mother's voice through the floor vent. She was in the workshop with my father late at night pacing. I could picture it clearly from years of habit, her arms crossed, her hair pinned back tight, the smell of oil and citrus polish clinging to everything. "We'll say it was Dorian's concept," she said. "No one will question it. Not after last year's win." "It's not just a concept," my father murmured. "It's a breakthrough. The automaton walks without rail guidance. It tracks voice commands." He's ready," she snapped. "You'll make sure of it." I pressed my palm to the vent. The automaton. They meant my automaton. The walking unit with the rotating hip joints I'd reworked from salvaged clockwork. The one I had cut my palm on a dozen times fitting the plates. They were going to parade it out under Dorian's name again. That night I didn't sleep. The next morning, while she was adjusting my posture over a drafting sketch, I spoke. "I still don't know where the courage came from. Can I present it?" I asked, not looking up. "At the exhibition. I built it. I know how it works." My mother didn't pause. Didn't even blink. "You were made to be his hands," she said calmly. Not his voice. I nodded like I understood. But something curled in my stomach and stayed there, hot and bitter. Dorian had changed by then. He wasn't the quiet, sullen boy I'd grown up idolizing. He had become sharper. Meaner. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was resentment. Either way, he took it out on me. "Your little friend walks funny," he said one day, watching the automaton circle the room. "Guess that's what happens when a wrist tries to think." I didn't reply. I just turned back to my notes. He grinned. "Come on. Don't be like that, Shadow. You want a medal? Go invent a backbone." At night, I started sketching in secret. Nothing big. Just things that were mine. A self-stirring teacup. A brace that could adapt to different limb sizes. A whisper hinge that closed drawers silently. I signed each drawing with my initials, KV. I tucked them into an old toolbox and slid it under the loose floorboard in the corner of the apprentice wing, the only place no one ever checked. Exhibition day came in a storm of silk and speeches. The workshop was lit from wall to wall. Dorian stood in front of my automaton, explaining its functions while it bowed and lifted tools for the crowd. Cameras flashed. Guild officers clapped. From the catwalk above, I watched it all, the mechanics, the movements, the applause. And I cried. Quietly. So no one would hear. Because ghosts don't cry. And that day I was nothing more than a ghost behind the workbench. The first time I saw her, she was laughing, which was strange because no one laughed in our house. Aunt Lyra arrived without warning during the midsummer festival, her coat damp from the fairy mist and her boots clapping on the stone walk like she had every right to be there. She looked nothing like my parents. Her curls were wild, not pinned. Her hands were ink-stained, not gloved. She hugged my father hard enough to make his monocle fall out. "It's been years," she said, eyeing me over his shoulder. "And this must be Kara." I froze. No one said my name like that. Like it belonged to me. My mother stepped in quickly. "She's shy," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder, not gently. Still finding her place. Lyra just smiled and extended a hand to me. "Well, I've got time." She stayed with us for 3 days in the guest quarters that hadn't been opened since before I was born. Everyone on the island came to see her, the navigator, they called her. The sister who had left Calderon, who charted wind currents and worked with mainland engineers. People told stories about her building a storm tracker with just 2 gears and a soup spoon. At the festival, I walked behind my mother, holding the basket of sealed prototype parts. Dorian, as always, led the way, shaking hands and pretending he understood the mechanisms he wore. Lyra drifted beside me. "You always carry the tools?" she asked casually. I nodded. "And the design kit?" "That too." I nodded again. She studied my hands. "Interesting. You've got a machinist's grip. Strong wrists. Bit of graphite on your nails." I didn't say anything, but I felt my face heat. That evening after the feast, she found me in the rear hallway, half hidden behind the corridor bookshelf. She sat down beside me, cross-legged, and opened a tin of mints. "Your parents think I don't notice things," she said, offering me one. "They're wrong." I stared at her. My throat felt tight. "I saw your diagrams. The hand work on the exhibition model. The tracing lines still had your marks." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. She looked at me kindly. "They're passing it off as Dorian's, aren't they?" That was when I broke. I didn't wail. I didn't scream. I just leaned forward, my shoulders shaking, and whispered the truth. About the training. The hidden lessons. The secret name. The toolbox. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she took my hand and for the first time in my life, someone squeezed back. "Show me," she said. We snuck to the apprentice wing. I pulled up the floorboard. The toolbox was right where I left it. I lifted it out, my hands trembling, and opened the lid. Lyra's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "These aren't just sketches," she muttered. "These are full schematics. Gods, Kara, these are yours." I nodded. She looked up at me, her voice steady now. "This is intellectual slavery." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it was serious. That night, I woke to shouting. Through the vent, I heard her voice rising, "You made her a ghost." Followed by my mother's ice-cold tone, "You have no idea what you're talking about." There was a crash. Then silence. By morning, Lyra was gone. So was the toolbox. And my door was locked from the outside. For 3 days, I was kept in my room. Meals came on trays. No tools, no sketches, no explanations. When I was finally let out, the festival was over, the workshop spotless. And no one said her name again. Not even Dorian. But I remembered. And I never stopped wondering what she'd do next. A year passed. Long, gray, and quiet. No one mentioned Lyra again. Not once. Not when the island's trade guild sent letters. Not when a councilman stopped by to interview Dorian about his recent designs. Not even when I found one of my old sketches, the adjustable brace displayed in the exhibition hall under the title, "The Vin Flexion Support, a Dorian Vin Original." I started sleeping less. Eating less. But still I worked. Because even if I hated what they did with my ideas, I still needed to make them. They were the only parts of me that felt real. Then one afternoon, the bell above our gate rang 3 times hard and sharp. My mother stiffened in the workshop. My father looked up from the lathe, his hands frozen mid-turn. We never got visitors unannounced. Not since the tribunal ban on unsanctioned mechanical testing. I peeked through the curtains. It was Lyra. She was flanked by 3 people in long coats with gold threadwork on the collars, the mark of the mainland's Guild of Ethical Craft. She looked straight at the window. Right at me. And she smiled. What followed was chaos. The council convened within the hour. My parents tried to shut it down, called it slander, said the Vin name had never been anything but honorable. But it was too late. Lyra had already submitted the journal. The toolbox sketches. The automaton blueprints all signed KV. and the guild had verified them. They called it an unprecedented case of identity suppression and academic mechanics. I had to ask what that meant. It means, Lyra said softly, you finally get to speak. The tribunal was held in the old assembly chamber, a dome of brass and glass filled with rows of stone benches and long-necked lamps. I stood at the center dais, palms sweating, heart pounding. My mother sat behind the panelists, lips tight, fingers curled around the edge of her coat. My father stood beside her, silent. Dorian slouched in his chair, arms crossed, eyes burning holes through me. One of the guild officers leaned forward. She wore spectacles that magnified her gaze unnaturally. Caravan, she said. You claim authorship of the following designs? I swallowed. Yes. She slid forward a page. Explain this. It was the whisper hinge. I took a breath and launched into it. The materials I used, the way I'd calculated noise reduction, how I had altered spring tension to soften the recoil. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied. Page by page, they questioned me. Page by page, I answered. Dorian was asked to comment halfway through. When pressed about the design methodology, he hesitated. Stammered. Misnamed a part. Then they gave him one of my unfinished schematics and asked him to complete it. He couldn't. The silence in the room stretched long and tight. My mother stood. She's unstable, she said sharply. She's been confused since she was a child. This is all a misinterpretation. But no one moved. The guild woman adjusted her glasses. Our analysis confirms these are original works by Caravan. We rule that full authorship credit, recognition, and intellectual property rights shall be assigned to her. Effective immediately. The hammer came down on the table. The sound echoed through the chamber like a bell. My parents were fined for intellectual fraud. Their names were stripped from half the registries. The council offered them leniency if they stepped down from their positions. They refused. Dorian said nothing. Not a word. Not even to me. Afterward, as the chamber emptied, Lyra placed a hand on my shoulder. You did it, she said. I looked back at the room where my life had been stolen, then returned to me, piece by piece. No, I whispered. They finally saw it. I left the Venn household the next morning. No ceremony. No goodbyes. Just a satchel, a signed release form from the council, and Lyra waiting by the harbor ferry with 2 mugs of sweet tea and a worn leather jacket she insisted I take. I didn't look back. The wind was different off the island, lighter somehow. Or maybe it was just that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking in anyone else's shadow. We moved to Arwenport, a coastal city thick with invention. Boats powered by solar sails drifted between glass harbors. The streets sang with the hum of workshop fans and buzz drones delivering toolkits to second-floor balconies. It was loud, unpredictable, alive, and terrifying. Lyra found us a small apartment above a materials co-op. The smell of copper and sea salt seeped through the walls, but I didn't mind. For the first few weeks, I barely left the flat. Not because I wasn't allowed, but because I could. There was no one knocking. No schedule. No assignment waiting on the table. And I didn't know what to do with that kind of silence. Lyra didn't push. She just brewed tea, tinkered with her air maps, and left scraps of cloth and tools on the table like bait for a skittish cat. When I did speak, it was in fragments. I don't know what to wear, I told her once, standing in the kitchen in the same grease-stained pants I'd worn for years. She shrugged. Then try something else. Or nothing at all. Robes are in right now. The Artisan Academy accepted me on scholarship, citing the tribunal records. We would be honored, their letter read, to welcome Caravan inventor, witness, and independent maker. It was the first time I'd seen my name in print. My real name. Not under Dorian's. Not behind a curtain. Just mine. I started classes a month later. First, I kept to myself. I flinched when people called me Kara out loud. I still sketched in tiny, cramped handwriting. But slowly I learned how to raise my hand. How to share an idea and not wait for someone else to claim it. Lyra made me celebrate every tiny step. You picked your own meal, she said one evening, holding up a fork like a toast. Mark it down. It was just soup. Exactly. Yours. I started sleeping better. Dreaming better. Once I even dreamed of the automaton again, only this time it bowed to me. The first friend I made was a girl named Naira. She built kinetic jewelry that reacted to mood signals. The first time she saw my schematic for the whisper hinge, she gasped and said, "Did you do this?" I hesitated, then nodded. She smiled. That's sick. And just like that, I started to believe maybe I could belong somewhere. Not as a stand-in or a name on someone else's badge, but as myself. Caravan. No longer the shadow. No longer the ghost. Just the girl who made things that moved and finally moved forward herself. I was almost happy. At the academy, I'd earned my first solo commendation. A recognition seal for an adaptive exosleeve I designed in metals class. Naira cheered so loudly they had to ask her to sit down. Lyra cried when I pinned the seal to the wall. And for a moment I felt like I was becoming someone I hadn't dared to imagine. Free seen whole. Then the letter came. It arrived folded in thirds, tucked between class notices and tech fair invites. The handwriting was unmistakable. Clean practice, careful Dorian's. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands trembled, but not from fear. Not anymore. Inside was only one page. Kara, I'm not well. The implants failed. Hands are worse than before. They say if I wait longer, the nerves will die entirely. They need a custom interface. They said only you could make it. If you can, please. No, I'm sorry. No, thank you. Just those spare lines, like every word cost him pride. I sat on the floor of the apartment and read it again. And again. Lyra found me there, still holding it. He's asking, I said, barely above a whisper. Not ordering. That's new, she replied, leaning against the doorframe. What do I do? She shrugged. Whatever you want. I don't know what I want. She knelt beside me, resting her hand on my shoulder. This time it's your call. Not theirs. Not mine. Yours. That night I didn't sleep. I went to the rooftop and stared at the harbor lights until dawn. Could I walk back into that house, the same house where I was built, not born? Could I face Dorian and look him in the eye and know he needed me not as a ghost, not as a proxy, but as a maker? And if I helped him, what would that make me? But if I didn't, who would I be? By morning I had my answer. I packed only what I needed. My tools, a clean slate book, and a prototype kit. When I told Lyra, she didn't flinch. You're not going back to be theirs, she said. You're going back to be you. There's a difference. I nodded. I took the ferry alone. The island looked smaller when I returned. Or maybe I had grown. The gates creaked like they always had. The vines on the outer wall hadn't been trimmed. I wondered if my mother still kept a clock by the front door, synchronized to council time. I wondered if she'd even look at me. Inside, the workshop was dim. Dust hung in the air like it had been waiting for me. Dorian sat in the same chair where he used to watch me work. Only this time he didn't posture. He didn't smirk. He just looked tired. His arms were wrapped in gauze and metal crude, rigid braces where his hands used to be. The implants had failed. The doctors were right. When he saw me, he didn't stand. He didn't smile. He only said one thing. You came. I nodded once. I didn't come to save you, I said. He looked down. I know. I came to finish what I started. On my terms. And for the first time in our lives, he didn't argue. The workshop looked exactly the same, down to the scuff marks on the stone floor where I used to drag my stool, and the faint outlines of the chalkboard equations that had never been mine but always had my handwriting. Only this time everything felt smaller, quieter. My father sat in the corner now, a man shaped more like a shadow. He didn't speak when I walked in, didn't even meet my eyes. He just nodded once as if to say, do what you came for and go. My mother never showed up at all. I didn't ask where she was. Dorian waited at the bench, arms bandaged and metal pinned. His face was thinner than I remembered, but the pride was still there, buried under pain and something that looked suspiciously like fear. I drafted an interface outline, he said quickly, as if trying to reclaim authority. It just needs a few. No, I said, setting my toolkit on the work table. He blinked. What? We do this on my terms or not at all? He was silent. I laid out the contract first. Not verbal. Not symbolic. Ink on paper, signed in front of 2 witnesses from the Island Guild. Every condition was spelled out. Full authorship credited to Caravan. No reproductions or modifications without consent. All usage and future upgrades to remain under her design license. One interface. One patient. One time. When he read it, he swallowed hard. This is thorough. It's necessary. For once, he didn't argue. He signed. The next few days were mechanical in every sense. I took measurements. Ran nerve scans. Rebuilt the motor signal translator from scratch because the existing one was garbage. The techs who had done the first install had cobbled it together from repurposed flight-grade components. It was wrong for human interface, too rigid, too slow. This needed to feel like fingers again. Like choice. I worked alone. My father watched sometimes but said nothing. Dorian followed the process like he was studying a foreign language he couldn't speak. Occasionally he asked questions. Real ones. Not jabs. Not dismissals. How do you get the signal to stabilize through the knuckle actuators? Capacitance buffering, I said without looking up. And I designed my own delay dampeners. He didn't speak for a minute after that. The implant was finished on the 6th day. I fitted the neural cradle gently, adjusted the sensitivity nodes, and tested the feedback loop with a simple command. Flex. Dorian's new fingers curled slowly, hesitantly, into a fist. Then opened. He stared at them. I can feel it, he whispered. Not pain. Signal. I nodded. That's the point. He looked up at me then, something shifting behind his eyes. Something that might have been regret. Or gratitude. Or both. But he didn't say thank you. And I didn't wait for it. I packed my tools, wiped down the bench, and turned to go. As I reached the door, he spoke again. I'm not going to claim it, he said. Not this time. I paused. Good, I said over my shoulder. Because if you do, I'll take it back. Outside, the wind off the cliffs hit me like a breath I didn't know I was holding. I didn't look back. I'd already taken everything I needed. My name. My work. Myself. Back in Arwenport, everything felt brighter. It wasn't just the salt air or the open windows in the apartment. It wasn't even the way Lyra smiled when she saw me come through the door with dust still on my boots and graphite streaked on my cheek. It was the quiet that followed. Not silence. Peace. I slept for a full 12 hours that night. When I woke, there was tea waiting and a stack of envelopes bearing the Artisan Academy crest. One of them was different, embossed in red wax with a formal header. Guild Symposium, Ethics in Crafting and Consent. Speaker request. Caravan. I read it twice before I believed it. They wanted me to speak. Not just as a maker but as a voice. A witness to a system that had allowed a child to be designed, trained, and used without credit. Without question. The very idea made my hands shake. But I said yes. The symposium was held in the Grand Pavilion, a glass hall surrounded by fountains that sang when the wind shifted. Makers from every district attended. Guild heads, student artisans, founders, critics. And me. I stood on a round stage with a headset mic and too many lights pointed at my face. My palms were sweating. My voice cracked on the second sentence. But then I looked at Lyra in the front row, hands folded, nodding. And I told the truth. I spoke about the ethics of engineered children. About mirror minds and invisible labor. About what it meant to be created not to live but to restore someone else's story. I didn't use Dorian's name, but I didn't have to. Everyone knew the case. I didn't want revenge, I said near the end. I wanted recognition. Ownership. And the right to decide who I am. The applause didn't come right away. It came slowly like a wave building from the back of the room, cresting forward. But it came. By the next week, the Guild launched a policy review into all talent engineering licenses. Kara's Clause, some called it, a new provision requiring the monitored development of cognitive design minors, including ethical oversight and direct crediting protections. They invited me to the signing ceremony. I went. But I didn't wear a blazer. I wore my workshop coat. Ink stains and all. After the event, the Guild Master herself presented me with a medal, not for innovation, but for ethical contribution to the crafting sciences. The first of its kind. I hope, she said, that your voice continues to shape the next generation. And then Lyra stepped forward with a small box of her own. Inside was a silver locket, smooth, brushed metal about the size of a coin. I opened it. Inside under glass was a microscopic print of a schematic. Tiny lines barely visible. My breath caught. It was my first invention. The self-stirring teacup. Unsigned. Unclaimed. But mine. I looked at Lyra. She just smiled. You were never a ghost, she said. You were the blueprint. Later that night, as I walked home along the coastal path, the wind tangled my hair and the sea roared far below. But I didn't feel small anymore. I felt steady. Rooted. And finally real.